consider doing an honors presents, she emailed me to see if I would be interested to be a speaker for the fall 2020 Honors Present lecture series. She said I might want to consider, relating the lecture to photography and art, my wilderness adventures and life pathway, and discuss the new interdisciplinary honors course that I am teaching. I said, absolutely. Secondly, this is a time when freshmen can go ahead and see who their professors really are. So here I am, and thank you so much for attending. In designing this presentation, right away I thought of my undergrad work at MSU and being a student in the late 70s and 80s. I thought of how my class has enriched my life and how I still reflect back on my education and how I live my life through art. For me, interdisciplinary simply means to learn from more than one branch of knowledge, and this fits my world. I feel it fits all of us in some way or form. It is enriching. It allows us to look at life from different perspectives, to collaborate with others, and to look critically at the world around us. My emphasis has always been the visual arts. So I'm going to center this presentation much around my life at MSU and as an undergrad, and also my life at MSU today. While at MSU, I do remember my ecology professor, Don Collins always giving the weather forecast. Myself, being an educator for close to 38 years, I too have given the weather forecast to students for decades. So here is your weekend weather forecast for Bozeman. Friday, it's a high of 34 degrees and a low of 18, moisture 20% chance, and partly cloudy. Saturday, a high of 23, low of -2, and snow 70%. High Sunday of 13 degrees with a low of -11, moisture 10%, and partly sunny. So it is time for you guys to get your skis and get going. So I'm going to go ahead then and share my screen with you, and we will get started. So I assume you can see, hopefully, the presentation. Yes. So here we go. I'm going to be moving pretty fast through this, but I wanted to start talking about my life in Montana, my life in Livingston, and my life in Yellowstone Park and the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness. But this is one of my favorite images I took of 3 running mountain sheep. I use this many times in talking about composition, the arrangement, how the organization is, the negative space, the rule of odd, the rule of thirds, and so on. So composition is a big thing right now in our world. And with the people shooting cell phones and all the billions upon billions of images today, creativity is a big part of that. The arts of my personal landscape centered around the mountains of Montana and Wyoming. Retracing my steps is a project I'm working on right now from an art show that I hope to have out in 5 years. Going back to places I was when I was your age, at 18 or 19 or 20 years old. And I was up on Mount Delano in Paradise Valley out of Livingston in 1976, with my brother Craig. And we put registers on many of the peaks in the Absaroka and Beartooth Wilderness for the Forest Service. And this is up in Paradise Valley on my land that I have, a few acres, and this looks up into Pine Creek. And this just came out a couple weeks ago. It's a YouTube video on my painting and serigraphs that I did and through the Brit Museum. But again, the Absaroka Beartooths are my playground, and this is an area that is so dear and special. And I have to say, my family is of utmost importance. Molly is my partner and friend that we've been together and married for 32 years. So I can't thank her enough for all the different things that she has done for me throughout my career. We make a good pair. And also my kids, Annie and Matthew, that are both going to school at Bozeman right now. From different adventures we've done, from being up around Rainier to, down to Yosemite and just climbing around the area here. And my brother, Craig, this is at Mount Douglas in the Beartooth Mountains in the early 70s. He was my climbing partner. We did a lot of things growing up, starting out at a young age. And this was in junior high. And this got my zest, my love for being in the mountains in the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness. And this is the first mountain that I ever climbed, and I was with Craig on that. But in high school, it was interesting. Craig Hall, a good friend of mine that's a music person, incredible guitar player in Bozeman, we did many adventures together in different mountains. And we both were asked to go with a couple of professors from MSU when we were, I think, a junior or senior. I can't remember for sure. And one of the high school instructors to go up Granite Peak, which is the highest peak in Montana. But we didn't make it to the top on that one. We got caught in weather. But I threw this in for you to look at the equipment we had back then. It was nothing compared to the equipment today. But we made it work. We still went on our adventures. And the one is a solo one that I was doing in Monument Peak in the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness. But my brother died in 1978. He was on a canoeing expedition, and he ended up saving the kids he was with and ended up drowning himself after about 100 or over 1,000-mile trip. And that was a tough situation for me at that time, and it still is. But I had the things they carried, we talked about that today in class, and many of you did, and that's something that I had to carry with me at MSU. But I went to MSU, and I was an RA in South Hedges. I had the only co-ed floor in at the time, and I went to my art classes, obviously drawing, painting, printmaking. But these are a couple of the ones that I did for my printmaking class. And this is what really put me on the map as far as my art, learning something of a different style. And I will talk about more of the serigraphy I did later on and how I got them all throughout galleries and throughout the nation. But this is a drawing I did. I did a lot of work with birds of prey, and you'll see pictures that I took of eagles later on here. But I remember one day I was at the dorm working at the desk, and I remembered, oh no, I got to have a drawing done for tomorrow. So I took 5 pencils, and I did a 15-minute scribble drawing with it. And I thought, okay, well, I'll turn it in. I kind of like it. I turned it into the professor, and he said, Paul, I want to see you in the hallway. And I said, okay, Professor Tobias. We went out in the hallway. I sat down. I vividly remembered it. He looked at me and he sat next to me and he said, if you can produce work like this, you're ready for New York City. And I said, wow, yeah, I can do this for you. No problem. So they gave me a different professor to work with. I didn't know exactly what I was doing at the time, but I was making connections. And it was my first beginning of understanding how the visual arts and performing arts intersect. Because he talked about the flutes, the trumpets, the violins, the basses, all in my work. And it started to make connections, and it still does today. And I won first place at MSU drawing in whatever year it was, I think around 1980. But it was interesting. 7 years after I had done this, I was in New York City for some meetings, and I saw a big, huge scribble drawing, very identical to what I had done. Not that we had even known each other, but I was on the right idea. I understood what he was saying about being at New York City. But when I was in Bozeman, I would wait for the semester to get done in the fall, and I'd head to Yellowstone Park in my 67 Buick and camp at Mammoth there for about 5-6 days just by myself. Go hot potting at night in the boiling river, but I would just photograph the mountain sheep all day long. And this is the one I showed earlier, but I wanted to capture wildlife with motion. I wanted it to have interesting compositions. So these are a few of the pieces that I did that I like. This is probably one of the most successful ones and hardest ones I did. This is called panning. This is where you swing the camera and have to go the same speed as the animal is running to go ahead and get it to be sharp in the background out of focus. So I was very pleased when I saw this, but it was film. We would go ahead and take pictures, and then we'd get them back 2 weeks later, and you'd look at them like a little kid and see, what did I come up with? And it was exciting to see what images were that you took that were there in front of you. Another one that I like, Between the Ram and the Ewe. And working with silhouettes, positive and negative space. But again, I was there all day long following the sheep around. And then I spent quite a bit of time around Gibbon Meadows in Yellowstone Park, photographing the elk in the fall, the bugling. It's an incredible sound. And this is where I got the camera low to go ahead and make the background the foreground out of focus and focus in on the bugling elk. But this is one that I feel is one of my most successful wildlife photographs because I feel it has a sense of emotion tied up into it. But I also spent quite a bit of time working with various animals. I wanted to get a picture of the snake's tongue coming out of this rattlesnake. So I worked with somebody that knew snakes and could help me with it and had the right camera equipment, the right lens, so I could go ahead and be at a safe distance. Always safety. And then I spent a great deal of time photographing eagles. I had knew of a place where I had a blind, meaning I could be away from the eagle nest and hide myself from the eagles and take pictures. And at this time, I saved my money to buy camera equipment, to buy different lenses, so I could go ahead and zoom in on the birds. And a friend actually gave me a large lens, or lent me, so I could take even more close-up pictures with them. And then this is in Glacier Park. I was coming off a climb at Mount Reynolds. I was by myself, and I remember lying in the grass for about 45 minutes taking pictures of this little weasel. In the wintertime, a weasel turns white, and they're known as an ermine. And up and down, up and down, up and down it would go, till finally it sat there for about a half a second. I was able to take a picture, and it ran away. Bears up in Hayden Valley. Lots of bears in Yellowstone, but they're hard to a lot of times take pictures of. But also, I have been to Alaska, so I had to throw a couple images in using a slow shutter speed to go ahead and get that blurred effect, to go ahead and create that different feel of that kind of ribbon effect of the water. This is up in Katmai in Brooks River. And this is out in Kenai Fjords. Another fairly hard shot to get of the whale coming up out of the water. And as you release the shutter, you need to make sure that the motion is at the top of the motion before it comes down. Otherwise, you miss the whole picture. So I was very pleased to see this one that I was able to get. This particular image has nothing to do with the story I'm going to tell you, but it has everything in a sense. I was up there this is in Yellowstone Park. I think it was April, and we were going up Hell Roaring Peak. And we were in the tent. There were three of us guys, and I ended up feeling something on my ear, and I was half asleep, and I pushed whatever it was down on my ear, and a tick crawled down inside my ear into my eardrum. And it was marching across my eardrum like, it was horrifying. And finally, after about 15 minutes, the tick crawled out. But the people in the tent were going on about all the ticks because we were finding them in our beards, in our hair. It was an awful experience. But I asked, when I got back to MSU, I asked the health service, a doctor there, I said, what would have happened if that tick would have stayed in my ear? He said it would have been serious. But he said, thank you to earwax, the tick crawled out. What does that have to do with this story? Absolutely nothing. But every time I see this picture, it reminds me of that. And I talk about science in this when I show this to kids that I was teaching, or even just to adults. If you look at the raindrops, the water is the light is inverted, so the sky is on the bottom and the ground is up on the top. So right away, integrating the curriculum with science is very, very effective in teaching students. But again, the rule of thirds, it's off-centered, pretty effective photograph. So I had all these images, and I was trying to get published, but I had rejection letters from National Geographic, Backpacker, Audubon, just various publications. But finally, Outside Magazine said, hey, we like your stuff you sent. We kept a bunch of them, and we want to put this one into the whatever journal or whatever year it was. I think it was 1983. So I was like, yes. I got a picture in Outside Magazine. It was my start. And they had more images they were going to use. And they were reviewing an article I was doing on people living in the backcountry, kind of, we think, almost as hermits. And that almost made it. It made it to the committee, but then it got rejected. So then I thought of my own project. So I came up with what's called Creations of a Wilderness. It was an interdisciplinary project where I took my disciplines from drawing. I took photography. I took painting, design. I took business because I had to figure out how can I make a living doing this. So then I took ecology and social awareness with all the images I had. How can I present different ideas to people to make them aware of our environment? Science, math, media and communications, and it was the MSU that they helped me. It was KGLT that helped me come up with the music for this multimedia presentation where I had 3 projectors, a huge sound system, and then I had posters that were sent out ahead of my performances and packets of information. And that was the help of a good friend from the activities in the production department through MSU. So I had made arrangements, and I traveled many universities from Montana all the way to Ohio, from Illinois to the University of Minnesota, to Duluth, the university up there, to Fargo, the university there, speaking, sharing my story, sharing what I was doing. And I had all this to music, and I'll share just some of the story here in just a minute. So I had to come up with something, though, to go ahead and have a catchy phrase. So I wrote, to see a wilderness, we must first open our eyes and see its elements. A grain of sand, a drop of water, a blade of grass, a mountaintop. That was written in 1981. So backing up one, let me see if I have it. So here, if you look at this, I had to come up with brochures. I had to come up with a card company. I had to come up with the posters so I could go ahead and market this. And it was very successful. I did 3 tours all the way to Ohio, 5 weeks at a time, and speaking to some high schools, but mostly it was universities and colleges. And through it was the marketing, through the business that I learned, I was able to make this successful. I remember being in, I think it was Moorhead, Minnesota, and I had 4 shows in 4 or 5 nights. I can't remember for sure. And I walked away with $1,400. This is in 1982 or 3. So I was like, wow, this is amazing. I'm making this work for myself. I'm working in the area of art, and I'm making it myself doing it. So I did numerous tours with that. And I did t-shirts. This is the logo I had designed for it, and then the cards, and I would sell those at the door. And it was actually quite a production. And I remember coming off of a climb up at Devil's Tower. We had been climbing some different routes up there. This had been like 1983. And I was talking to some people they were from Madison, I think it was La Crosse, Wisconsin. And I was telling them what I was doing. I was taking more pictures for this production I was doing. And she said, did you do that, Creations of a Wilderness? I saw it. And I told my boyfriend, you need to see that. So that was very special for me, that what I was doing was working. It was getting me out there. With that, I had to come up with trusted friends that I could do mountaineering trips with that I trusted. Being in a snow cave for 3 days with somebody, being on the end of a rope with somebody that you trusted your life with. And numerous of the people still, we get together today. We're still good friends doing trips. And that's in encouraging you to go ahead and have trusted friends that build you up, friends that you can trust when you're out in the wilderness. So this is one experience I had after I graduated from college, I went to the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness and stayed with a good friend, Charlie. He was an old prospector of 81. He lived up Bridge Creek, up in the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness, up the Boulder River drainage. And I had gotten to know him, as many of friends did. I was one of many working at a youth camp called Christicon, where I was a counselor and a maintenance man. Any break I would get, I'd go up to see Charlie and talk to him and ask about his stories. He was a mentor. He was a teacher for me. The funny thing is I didn't have a lot of mountaineering gear, so I sewed it. I had my mom sew the pants. These were Gore-Tex pants that we sewed. The mittens were Frostline kits. I had a down suit that were sewn. And I was working at the dorm, and I sewed this coat. I went down through some of the things that I had sold, and I went down and bought some fabric, and I sewed the coat. And I used it in 40 below weather. So I was resourceful, and I didn't have the money to buy a lot of the things that we have today. But this is Charlie. He was an old prospector up in the mountains. He actually lived in the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness. He had been up there so long that he was able to, the Forest Service let him stay there till his death. And he died in 1983. And this was his cabin there. The cabin I had was 2 miles above his place. There were 4 of us that he was the one that had given this claim away. And the cabin was built in the late 1800s. And that's where I spent quite a bit of the time that winter also. But there's Charlie panning down there for gold. But he was an incredible man. And I'm going to go ahead and read something from his journal, or the journal, in just a second. This is the old cabin that I had, that I spent time in by myself, and I did have some friends come up too. But it was built in the late 1800s, and it was cold. The wood stove wasn't very good, and I never got the cabin above 40 degrees in it, but I made it work. And I threw this one in because even though the picture is out of focus, it was a self-portrait of myself. I had just got back from snowshoeing the 2 miles from Charlie's up to this cabin. And I remember this elk. It was so cold, but there was this big bull elk just out there in the timber and me. And we both looked at each other and just sat there. And he looked at me, I looked at him, and we both respected each other, gave each other space, and just kept going our way. It was a kind of a sense of survival. But that headlamp was a state-of-the-art headlamp at the time, and it's nothing compared to the equipment that we have today. But I spent hours upon hours reading in books such as Thoreau, Edward Abbey, Aldo Leopold, some of the books or some of the authors that we even talk about in Text and Critics, Wendell Berry. But I'm in my hammock above the wood stove trying to stay warm. And I wanted to read it's just a couple paragraphs here of the journal that I wrote, because I wrote 200 pages in a journal that I'm looking at using for this project I'm doing on retracing my steps. This is written January 6th, 1982. The stars were shining brightly, and only a crescent moon was in the sky. The temperature was 20 degrees below Fahrenheit. Ah, yes, the cold temperature outside was warmed by the welcoming orange glow from a kerosene lamp, revealing the silhouette of a person sitting on a bench in his cabin. He was reading a book. I removed my snowshoes, turned my headlamp off, and knocked on the door. "Come on in, door's open," a voice inside said. "Birds on a cold day." The man poured me a cup of hot coffee. Soon my hands were warm while grasping the hot cup. The steam settled on my glasses. "Cold night, isn't it, Charlie?" I said. "Ah, yes, you'll sleep good after your long day of snowshoeing on the mountain." "The day was kind of a lonely one, Charlie." He said nothing. The hissing of the coffee pot broke the silence. Charlie opened his skull can and placed a pinch under his lower lip. He then spit the juices on an old newspaper which lay on the floor. It served as his spittoon. "You know, Paul, man is the loneliest animal alive. We create our own loneliness. Society is okay, but people have to learn to give of themselves. That's what living is all about, giving of yourself." So that was something that was a special time for me. And when he talked about that, "Come on in, doors open," I still think of that. But it was cold. This is going above Charlie's with a good friend named Jay. This was camping when it was 40 below near Independence. We were on our way up to Baboon. And this is one that I think, too, I look at Michelangelo. Michelangelo says it right when he says the greater danger for most of us is not that our aim is too high, that we achieve it, but that it is too low and we reach it or we don't achieve it. Sorry, I can't see the whole thing with this in front of me. But this is when I was by myself up there, and I made it up to this one point, and I was just elated, so I set my camera up and took a picture. But also during that winter, we went on some other trips, and this was skiing from East Rosebud across the top of the Beartooth to Cook City. Normally it doesn't take, you can do that in a couple days, but this took us 6 days because we got caught in a big storm up there. But there again, being with people you trust. But at that time, we did not have the receivers that people have today to go ahead on the skiing. So we had to drag an avalanche cord behind us to go ahead and try to be as safe as we possibly could. But this is up at Fossil Lake on top of the Beartooth Plateau before we got ready to drop down into Cook City. But it's a very, very beautiful place. Another one, we were trying to go up Granite Peak in the wintertime, but we did not make it. Made it up into the Aero Lake country in the Beartooth, but it was just, weather was too bad. And again, this friend Jim, I did many trips with, but we always respected each other and we always were safe. And I threw this in because we spent time, most of it was going from snow cave to snow cave, and that was a good way to stay out of the cold elements. But on the top image there, you can see the skis. It kind of looks like a crisscross on there. Those weren't skins. We did not have skins at that time. We took ropes and we wrapped the bottom of the skis with ropes so we could climb up the steep terrain. So it's interesting when I see today what technology has done for the outdoor world is pretty incredible. But this is the same area then in the summertime. And one of the things that I find interesting is, as an artist, to go ahead and see the little snippets, see the different areas of light, and see the light that is ever changing. And this is what gives me ideas for many of the paintings that I do today. Artists can maybe sometimes see things differently. We can hear things differently. And that's one of the things that is pretty special to go ahead and do. This is up by Glacier Peak, another peak on top, or in the Beartooth, that very, very beautiful country. And this is actually the Bear's Tooth itself, where it gets the name Beartooth Mountains. We were on a climb up here, Jim, a friend of mine again, and I remember getting up to the steep area there before we got up to the top. We did not make the top because of weather, but I asked Jim, I said, I would feel safer being roped up. This rock, which is like little ball bearings, was all over up there, and it was very hard to stand. So then we roped up, but we made it up to the base of the climb. When we were starting up the climb, then the weather turned. The lightning started to come in, so we ended up moving out. But it's okay not to meet the top of your destination. The idea is to enjoy it and come back safely. But this one, coming back, this is the Beartooth from a distance. We were going across a snowfield, and we were talking, and all of a sudden I was talking to myself. Jim disappeared. And I said, Jim. And finally, I could hear a muffled sound. He had fallen through the snow where the water melting had created a cavern underneath there. And he ended up hurting his leg pretty bad, and he couldn't get out until finally he was able to crawl out through an opening. But I ended up carrying both backpacks out because his leg was pretty bruised up. So again, you have to be careful. And I try to always be careful, but things do happen. As it happens on Granite Peak, which is the highest point in Montana. I've been up there numerous times, and the snow bridge on the right is kind of a sketchy area. And just not too many weeks ago, they had to do a rescue from people that had fallen off of this snow bridge. So again, you have to be careful. There's one move towards the top that is quite sketchy as far as a lot of exposure. So you have to be careful. And I was always with people that I trusted. But on this particular day, we got up on top, and we thought we had more time than we did. We got way up on top, summited, and then coming out, we were probably just a couple hundred yards from the top. The lightning came, and as I remember, it was kind of the sleet. Jim was getting zapped with his ice axe on his back, so we had to lower the ice axe to get any metal that we could from where we were standing or where we were trying to hunker down. And it wasn't a large storm, but it was one that then left, but it made everything wet. So we had to rappel down out of there on part of that. But I think of that, and I think how weather can change, especially in these high mountains. This is the winter at Heart Lake. We went in to go into the geyser basins, and this was Kim using the geyser basins so we could save on fuel. But it was 40 below zero. And I remember Tom Murphy, my friend, that was doing an honors presents to my class and was talking about the same place. And we were supposed to go out and wade the river, the Snake River, but we ended up going back the way we came because of the cold, frigid temperatures. So with that, I ended up then deciding, I got my education degree. I want to do something in education because I love working with people and kids. So I did have a successful career in teaching. And I've worked with many students, and this particular student is kind of, I would say, maybe my pride and joy. Travis came in, he was a junior in high school, and he had been struggling the year before. His mother had been killed in an accident. She worked for the city, and he was struggling. He sat there for a couple weeks, and finally I said, it was photography. I said, Travis, get a camera. Go take some pictures tonight of the football game. He said, okay, I'll do it. He did it. He came back, and they were great. So he kept going. It became intrinsic for him to go ahead and do the assignments, not extrinsic to go ahead and just get the grades in. Long story short, by the time he was out of high school, he won first place in the Wyoming State High School journalism. He was flown to California to photograph the yacht race, the American yacht races. He went to photojournalism school, a big one in Missouri. And he wanted to be on the staff of the paper. He was a freshman. He went in to talk to the professor. The professor said, "We don't take freshmen." But just as he was there, an explosion went off in the chemistry department, and he handed Travis a camera, and he said, "Let's see what you can do." Well, Travis made the staff. He did an incredible job. So he graduated, I think it was 4 years later. But by the time he was out of high school, he was on the cover of USA Today. He was in Time. He was in Newsweek. He was in Sports Illustrated. But when he was in high school, I vividly remember he was looking at a book on war, and he said, "You know, Waldum, I need to go photograph a war sometime." Well, he did 3 times. He was in the Middle East, and his work was published, has been all over the country, and I'm sure abroad. And the middle one of the flag and the 2 people standing there was one of MSNBC's Picture of the Year in 2013. So I was very proud of him, but not just for his success, but he came back twice to talk to the whole student body and to the community to share his story. And working with other students, this is another girl that was doing a portfolio for scholarships, which she won. Her work she did in Haiti and putting it together. There are 2 of the images in Haiti. But it was quite interesting to see the success of students. And when I see successes of students, it makes me feel successful, just as it does today with text and critics in the classes I teach. But to do that, to have an incredible school system, you have to have the faculty. We had in a town of about 32,000, we had 24 full-time art teachers, visual art teachers. We worked together. This is at the UCross Foundation there. We toured, we went to museums, and we were a very close group. And for 5 years, I was head of this whole group working on curriculum and things. But they did raccoon firings together. They held officer positions in the community and state. We were a tight group. And this is another facilitator, Marie. But we went to the Kennedy Center numerous times. And I did one presentation for the Kennedy Center for the Partners in Education annual meeting on the importance of the visual and performing imagery, how a visual art piece can serve as a text, how we can analyze it, how we can dig deep into it. So it became what's called visual close reading. And a lot of time in our education, we have what's called a Webb's depth of knowledge of a 1, where we recall information, but we're really not getting to the heart of maybe our learning. But when we hit to strategic thinking, which is at a level 3, it's this deeper analysis, interpretations, judgments, evaluations, and it's an increased rigor is what the term was back then. But the highest level is when we get into the creative process, where we extend our thinking and we produce a project over time, and we synthesize and we engage and we have critical thinking and we make connections. And this is where I got the idea of doing an honors present on creativity. And I'll talk about that shortly. So it was 34 years of teaching in a district. I said I would be there 1 year. 5 years as the facilitator and 40 years as a professional artist. And during that time, though, I was teaching, I was doing summers. I would rented out a warehouse up in Livingston, and I was doing these big silkscreen prints. And I had my lucky break with the printmaking. I took some of them down to Denver and to a gallery, and they liked them. They said, "Well, we'll have to see if Mr. Ryan likes them, and we'll let you know." Well, I got a call from C.G. Ryan, who had 5 galleries around the country in Denver, Scottsdale, Santa Fe, Houston, Minneapolis, and he even did take stuff to New York. And he said, "Paul, we take about 1 out of 1,000 artists to put them on a contract, but we want to put you on a contract. Anything you do, we want to buy." And I thought, wow, for a young artist in his mid-20s, it was incredible. So I flew down there, and the guy picking me up at the airport, he had my name, Paul Waldum, trying to find out who I was. And he expected somebody older. And I thought, I went for it. I followed my dreams. So I did my Creations of a Wilderness and presented that, and I went into doing my art. And so I always had to, again, sell myself. And so I had to go ahead and have literature to go ahead and promote it. And these are some of the examples of the silk screens that I did during that time. And it turned out to be very lucrative as an artist to go ahead and do these. But I always maintained to go ahead and do my teaching at the same time. This is the Boulder River Valley, kind of on the way up to where Charlie, the old prospector, was. For people that know how to do silk screen, this was 28 screens, different screens to go ahead and to create this. And this one is Paradise Valley, the top one, and Yellowstone Lake on the bottom. But then the print market died down about 1990. And I thought, well, okay, I need to think of another medium. So I started pastels because I wanted to go ahead, I had done those to go ahead and do quick sketches of what I wanted to do for my prints. But it turned out one gallery said, hey, you're onto something, keep going. So I did. And before too many years, I was in the Buffalo Bill Art Show and Sale in Cody. I was in the Yellowstone Art Museum in Billings. I was in the Britt Museum in Wyoming and the C.M. Russell Museum and the Nicholas Museum. So it was cool. And then am I on, Ray? Yeah. So one of the things that I've done is I like to share my talents. And the bottom, or the one over on the left, is one I won the gold award at the Buffalo Bill Art Show and Sale. And it was a $10,000 award. And I put quite a bit of the money into for scholarships under my brother's name, the Craig E. Waldum Memorial Scholarship. And I gave it to art students that were in high school in Gillette and Livingston at the time to go ahead and help them in humanities and in pursuing the arts. So that was very special for me. The one on the left is one that I did for the Britt Museum. It was a 16 by 20 pastel, and it sold for $8,000, and 100% of the donation went to the Britt Museum to help fund the museum. So it's special to be able to do these types of things. These are two paintings. I did a show in 2018 at the Britt Museum. These are two of the paintings that were on the location of the museum that I donated to the museum for their permanent collection. This is a couple weeks ago. I was at the Buffalo Bill Art Show and Sale in Cody, where we had an hour and a half to paint a picture. This is what I did, and it just sold. But a lot of the money goes to charities, to museums, to nonprofits. That's what is special about being able to do that in the arts. But the most special painting is the one I did right here. This is working on the donation that I did for the Montana room at the Norm Asbjornson Hall. And it was through these two people, or three people, Dr. Dean Lee and Norm Asbjornson, the one in the middle, and Dean Gunnick, that had the idea for this. So we met and numerous times and saw the room before the building was even completed. And we talked about doing a painting of somewhere where Norm had grown up, which is up by Winifred on the Missouri River. So I went up there. Molly and I went up there once, and I went up again, and I found this place, and I painted, and I slept in my car all night because I wanted to get the morning light coming in. So this is the painting then that is on display in the Montana room. Spring along Knox Ridge Road, Missouri River, 60 by 96 inches. These are my oil paintings. This is an oil of the Gallatin, not far from Big Sky. The Bridger Mountains, and on the top, and by Yellowstone, or the Yellowstone River down below, south of Livingston, Paradise Valley. These are pastels, numerous pastels that I've done that I still have a few, but most of them have pretty much sold. But I love working in the pastel medium. This is Boulder River, not far from where Charlie the old prospector was. But different images from the Gallatin to the Bighorn Mountains to Paradise Valley. Different images from the Lone Mountain on top to above our property, not too far from Black Mountain on Pine Creek Lake, to aspens that I sold 2 years ago at the Britt Museum show. To working, I don't do a lot of wildlife, but the magpie, working with the horses. I do like doing things with moody images, bringing out kind of an emotion into it. Pastels of the prairie. When I lived in Wyoming, I was very influenced by the prairie and the big landscapes that were there. And I wanted to do a series of those for the show I did. I did 50 paintings for the Britt Museum in 2018. So I retired from teaching in 17 so I could paint a year for this show. And these were in the Bighorn Mountains of Wyoming. Beautiful, beautiful country. This is one I did that I was a very special piece. I've almost taken this back in time of a different venue in our area around Montana and Wyoming. And it sold to one of the people that was I think was the director of the museum down there. So for his own permanent collection. So I was pretty pleased with that. But I enjoy doing the barns also. The one over on the bottom right is just about 100 feet from where my land is up in Paradise Valley. So it's kind of special to have that piece. And that sold to the same gentleman as bought the other one. The one on the bottom right was in the show that I did in 2018. It was actually one of the favorite images of the show. It wasn't done to be a controversial piece as far as the coal, but it was done because of the interest of the lines and the shape and the smokestacks coming out. So it actually turned out to be quite an interesting piece. And I like the one of the red barn over on the left. So moving through that then, I designed this class through the help of students from the last year that gave me ideas and how we could do an interdisciplinary class in the arts and tie it into engineering, into the science. And Dr. Lee was always so good to listen to our ideas and feedback. But I noticed the land grant's mission is to work with art, or the creation of knowledge and art. And I saw that knowledge and art. And I think that's what I came from for 34 years. We talked about the importance of the arts. And I liked the statement talking about it in integrity, inclusion, collaboration, curiosity. And I thought, wow, this really fits in. So the course description of the class is through this interdisciplinary course, students will explore creativity and innovation through the creation of art, through individual and group projects. Through this work, the students will develop a creative and collaborative mindset that will give rise to innovation and the expansion of knowledge in the students' academic fields of interest. Students will be afforded hands-on opportunities for original and innovation exploration, conceptualizing, creative problem solving, and critical thinking, while developing a high level of understanding of the creative process across disciplines through the creation of art. The course will culminate in a public exhibition of the students' creative work. So with that, the class is up and running, from creativity to innovation and exploration of artistic expression through the creation of art. So this is the first time it's been offered this semester. And so we're looking at ways the creativity and innovation are impacted in the different disciplines. We have 2 CBN, emphasis on biomedical science, 1 CBN in biochemistry, 1 biochemistry, 1 biological engineering, 1 civil engineering, 1 chemical engineering, 1 modern languages and literatures, emphasis on Hispanic studies, 1 DIS, emphasis on paleontology, 1 DIS, emphasis on conservation, biology, and ecology, sustainable foods and marketing, 1 physics, 1 fish and wildlife, ecology and management, 1 elementary education, 1 political science, English literature, and 1 astrophotography interest. So we look at what is art? What is the purpose of art? What is creativity and innovation? What can art teach us? Creativity is the capability or act of conceiving something original or unusual. And innovation is the implementation of something new. Innovation is the creation of something that has never been made before and is recognized as the product of some unique insight. So why is art important? And we talk in class a great deal about this. It brings students together to dream, to think, to collaborate, to question, for critical thinking, curiosity, to create, to share, explore, and community engagement. And one of the things about art, it brings the emotional impact to the viewer, and it can be a catalyst for change, for communication, preserve culture. This is a magazine cover I've used many times in teaching that was in, I think it was 1985, the June issue of an Afghanistan girl that became known as the Afghan Girl. That was on a plight or leaving a refugee from Afghanistan to Pakistan. But it became one of the most famous images on National Geographic. So we discussed that and why. And the impact was that people around the world wanted to help. And that's important, to help. That's the power of art. And we see that today. This is something that we just talked about a few weeks ago. How does art affect the social awareness and promote change? we're going through that right now, and you've gone over this in Text and Critics many times. We all try to seek answers, how we can go ahead and improve our systems, how we can work together and collaborate. So with that, these are other areas that we look at: the social change, climate change, medicine and technology, physics, engineering, architecture, economics, education, artificial intelligence. So those are some of the areas that we address. And students sign up for one of these in their discipline, and they help present the lesson. This is painting outside to maintain social distancing. This is called Mask Up. So this is working outside. We had an incredible fall to work outside. So this is painting. This is also painting, working on encaustic, hot wax painting, always masked up. The one on the bottom is Avery. She's working on doing a piece where the water meets the earth and the ecosystem in between. This is some of the midterm projects. We don't have any of the final ones, obviously, at this time, but these are the midterms ones we just finished going over last week. But these are acrylic paintings, an abstract of human impact on biological diversity, and researched by a biochemical major, Haley Swearson. This is COVID-19, a mixed media and encaustic painting. Cell images created and researched by CBN major Quinn Cross. And I love the one he did of the wax of the cell. And this is something that is very useful if you're going into, let's say, medicine, which Quinn is interested in. What a thing to talk about on an interview, how the creative process, how humanities can go ahead and impact your life, and actually talk about creativity and the importance of knowledge and the creative process. This is a glass sculpture, art and culture. Sorry, I can't read the whole thing on my screen, but it was working the glass or the mirrors, culture faced together, one next to one another. Artwork created and researched by political science and writing literature major Chris Bokaboy. So he's building a sculpture, and then he's going to be doing it in mirrors, possibly, to go ahead and have words reflect back and forth. He also did this incredible poem, Between Two Trees, and he did 4 drawings to go along with it. They're all framed up, and these will be exhibited in the Norm building around the honors floor with his poem on there. But incredible. And here he's dressed up, giving his presentation to the class. This is Bryce Graham, a civil engineering major with a transportation focus. And it was so interesting, his painting there. What it was, he was studying an artist from Mondrian, and he ended up coming up with the bright colors in the middle as an urban downtown, with the cool colors to give a little more calmness to the area outside the city, the parks, with the interstate going both direction over it. But also working with photography, because we do interdisciplinary projects where they come up with different themes, such as working on infinity, working on transformation. So each person is coming up with ideas, and then they put them in the discussion posts, just like many of you do on D2L, and we talk about them. This is a student at DIS major, Clarissa Koo, working on her oil paintings of a starling and her scientific illustrations of a variety of insects. These images were created from her own research, from her own photographs. So these will be completed for the final. This is Annie Waldum, my daughter, a CBN and biochem major, with her images included with her COVID-19 spike protein research that she's doing on campus. It's the model on the bottom left. And then it's an acrylic painting she did on the bottom right of the COVID-19 virus, and she's currently working on more paintings of the viruses, and then her creative collaboration working with photography to tie that in to her idea of the cell biology and the COVID project. And the mask over there, you can see. This is incredible photographer, John Russell, interest in his in the physics and the images created in the astrophysics and the research. And he does incredible work. And these take him hours upon hours upon hours to go ahead and create with multiple layers. But he's researched his photography to an incredible degree, and he's specializing in long exposure photography. Encaustic and acrylic paintings created in research by Fish and Wildlife and Ecology Management major Avery Berg. So here she's talking about, in the middle, she's talking about the two ecosystems, and she's still going to be working on the piece. But she's a very, very incredible human being and a great artist with what she's produced in her wildlife, in her paintings as of there. Uma Graham, she's also a DIS major on conservation, biological, and ecological sustainable foods and marketing. What she's doing is she's painting all these small paintings on the end of wood. And then she does these in classes with students. I think she's done with adults. They paint something, but then she serves sustainable food as part of her promotion with the arts, which is an incredible way. And she's doing something to celebrate wild animals of Montana, highlighting critical biotic and abiotic factors for supporting their population and education on biodiversity and ecosystems. So she's doing incredible work on sustainability. Very interesting project. CBN Major Brad Burns showing DNA sketch and how it makes up the DNA molecule. And he's creating it served as creating the notes for his musical composition. So what it's very interesting. His final is going to be on the same idea. Each color, which is part of the protein, serves as a note. So he played this song with going by what he was creating with his particular DNA model. So it definitely is tying in his interdisciplinary work with visual arts as well as the performance art in his discipline. Sophia, emphasis on atmospheric science and the physics of cooking, encaustic painting and acrylic paintings, and she did her own research, obviously, in physics on that. But working with hot wax to go ahead and create atmospheric perspective, and she's now in the bottom right. One is that she's been looking at pop art, working with Lichtenstein, an artist from the 50s and 60s. Sage is a chemical engineering major. She's working on chemical heat transfer work, and she's going to put the one over the top of the other. So she's working with horses. She works for she's on the rodeo team. And it's really cool how she's putting her painting in with her heat transferring work. Biological artwork created and researched by biological engineering major Bennet Bayliss, and he's doing his own abstractions of working with his structures that he's creating from his drawings. And it's very interesting to see him work on his tight drawings and then adding paint to them. And last, this is the acrylic painting and the motions created and researched by elementary education major Kennedy Warner. And what it is for her final, she's working on a lesson for students to paint and evaluate personal emotions. So each one of these paintings, and she hasn't painted much, but it was working on tension, it was working on anxiety, difference that she could work with students on creating some, you can see kind of a circle going through it, which ties it all together. And last picture, this is where I was I think it was about 2 weeks ago, October 10th, 2020. This is the claim cabin along Bridge Creek where I spent time in the Absaroka Mountains. And I wanted to just read, this is where I had spent the time. So we have students do an honors present, or they do a position paper. So this was my position paper, my notes that I'm going to be doing something with. The door is no longer open to Charlie's cabin, and the claim cabin is now visited by numerous critters. As I sit next to the remaining pieces of the wood stove, I remember the smell of baking biscuits and the cracking sound coming from the wood stove. I remember swinging in my hammock above the fire, staying warm, reading, writing. I remember Thoreau's quote in Waldum, "I have 3 chairs in my house, 1 for solitude, 2 for friendship, and 3 for society." I also remember writings of Wendell Berry and Aldo Leopold, all experienced during the few weeks in the winter of 1982. I remember Charlie's conversations, friends visiting. I remember drinking coffee with Charlie, learning of his past, his life. Charlie was a mentor, a teacher. I remember the gold pan hanging on the wall in his cabin. Then I asked, Charlie, you been to any good gold mines in your days? Then silence. Yep, the problem is they are never there when I wake up. Memories, experience from the weeks in the winter of 1982. I remember staring at the brilliant stars, the silence, hearing my heartbeat, true silence, few people within 25 miles of my surroundings, solitude, isolation. I remember sub-zero temperatures stinging my skiing, snowshoeing, checking bindings, all things I experienced during my few weeks in the winter of 1982. Many doors have been opened since I wrote the journal entry on January 6th, 1982. Doors to a life with my family, doors to other adventures, doors open to meet thousands of students who some I continue to stay in contact with today. Doors open to pursue my art career and doors open at MA. And now, as I retrace my steps, I will always remember the words coming from a voice inside a small cabin along Bridge Creek. Doors open, come on in. Comforting words on a cold day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was fantastic. I know that some students only have enough time to stay just for the hour presentation, but for all of you that are still here, this is an open question and answer period. I am just intrigued by any answers that Paul can give. So if you want to put your questions in the chat, you can do that. There are also a small enough number of us that if you wanted to ask, just raise your hand and I can call on you for that too. While we're waiting for the chat to come in, oh, yes, okay, we have a question from Helen, and she is wondering, Paul, what is the most beautiful place you have ever painted?
You know, for me, Paradise Valley is pretty special. But gosh, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. I love the Bighorn Mountains and I love the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness. But I don't have actually a favorite place though.
Paul, I'm wondering if there have been any certain ways you've seen your background in education inform your art or vice versa, and how art has helped you teach.
Well, I think just being an artist, this has been my whole life, has helped me go ahead and lay the foundation for where I wanted. I feel a pretty good understanding of the art world. It has helped me in teaching. I love to share knowledge. And I had a high school instructor that arranged for me to have my own shows when I was in high school around the community. And I wish to do the same for other people. So for me, they go hand in hand in what I'm doing.
We have a question from Bailey, and so it says, you've been very humble about your work in class, which I also agree. Your photographs are very moving. I love seeing your Alaska work. What is one word of advice you would give to people who want to explore the art?
You know, perseverance and don't be afraid of vulnerability, because you have to put yourself out there, but you have to persevere and you have to have thick skin, as a lot of them say, and be able to take, in a sense, rejection. I know Dean Lee can answer that same thing in the music world. It's just what it is, but keep at it. And yeah, it helped me see, some success.
Yeah, I think it's so important too that you talk about taking that risk and really putting yourself out there. Another question we have is from Brian, and he said, did you have a favorite animal to take pictures of back in Yellowstone?
I love the elk, and I love equally the mountain sheep are very inspirational and a beautiful animal and very stoic. I like the mountain sheep a lot.
Then we have Jake says he noticed a lot of your paintings and your work were of mountains or prairies. Have you ever done work in tropical or beach areas?
You know, I have done beaches. I did one for a big corporation in New York, and they wanted an ocean scene. So I have done some, and I've done some sketches on the beaches in Hawaii also.
Connor wonders if you have any thoughts on musk ox.
Musk ox?
Yes.
They're pretty cool. I've seen them up in Alaska, but I have never really taken pictures of them much. It'd be cool to do that. I flew over with a fish and game up the caribou herds years ago, which was way cool, where there were thousands and thousands of caribou. So I got to see that, which was a pretty special deal.
Then Morgan is wondering, do you think your time in Montana has influenced your view on art and its role in other disciplines, or was that something that developed elsewhere?
Oh, I'd say it was, for me, definitely what growing up in Montana. And like I talked about, like with my brother, Craig, you know, we did so many things together, and I did it with my other brother and sister also. But I grew up in a family where we were always outside, and I just had a love for being out. And I came to understand and to know the nature's changing light and situations. It was always inspirational, from the pinks to the reds to the oranges, whatever it was.
Yes, Steven, go ahead. Yeah.
Paul, I just want to thank you for this incredible presentation. And I've been struck by a couple of things, and the students have picked up on this, your humility. You're such a great artist, but you know, for us to see painting after painting and photo after photo, you're teaching the students how to act in this world in such a beautiful way. The other theme, I loved how you recognized Montana State University and the breadth of the education that you've received here, and that means so much, your gift of the painting. But what is so clear, here you are, the last part of your presentation was all about your students. And that is, I've always noticed that it's never about you. It's about what you always have done for your students, for your family, for Montana, for your art. I think that's an incredible example for our students on how to live a beautiful life. So I don't really have a question. I just want to emphasize the things that have just struck me. So thank you for this, and I'm so grateful that it's recorded, because this is a part of history. 100 years from now, people are going to watch this and they say, "Oh, those lucky students, they were in the room with Paul Waldum," and we're going to say, "Yes, we were." So
I'll be saying I'm lucky to be with the students when I see what they do too.
Yeah. It's just a comment that I have. And thank you, Paul, for being at Montana State in honors in the Department of Education, and for all these students who you are so impacting in such a beautiful way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Were there any other questions before we wrap up? Paul, you were getting, I don't know if you've opened the chat, but you're getting a lot of thank yous for presenting today. And yeah, we are all so appreciative that you could be here.
Glad to do it. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. Thank you so much. I can repost the link for you, Benjamin. There you go. Cool. Thank you all for being here today, supporting Honors Presents, and listening very attentively to Professor Waldum. If you have any questions for the Honors Presents team, both Kate and I are here, and you can always email us. And once again, thank you, Paul, for being here.
You're welcome.